All right, me. It is the 23rd. It is currently -1 degrees. I think with the wind chill, it's like -10. Um, and this morning, I finished reading Uketsu's Strange Pictures. This is Uketsu's first book, actually. Earlier this month, I read Strange Houses, which is actually his second book. But I read this one so shortly afterwards because Uketsu's third book, Strange Buildings, will be coming out in March, I believe. So I want to make sure that I read this before then. So I had bought this book pretty much immediately after I finished reading Strange Houses. I think it was like the next day. So yeah. Translated by Jim Ryan, as with the other one, and I believe the third one will also be translated by Jim Ryan. So thoroughly enjoyed this piece. Probably not as much as I enjoyed Strange Houses, right? And I think a lot of that has to do with what is being presented as the mystery, right? In which I think Strange Houses has, to me, a more interesting hook, I guess, right? Of you are there's this thing of where it's very clearly like, this is how you should, like, this is how houses are built and houses are designed. Why are we doing these kind of weird layouts and weird things with these houses, and then speculating from there, versus the Strange Pictures, this, which is, I mean, it's taking the concept of like, and it lays it out in the introduction of like, we are taking the interpretations of drawings and then extrapolating from there, right? Which is, certainly still valuable and certainly still very important. And you see where, right, it's, you see where you get things from, but it's also very easy to create these red herrings for you, right? Which is interesting. So yeah. Much like Strange Houses, Strange Pictures does the same thing. Over like the first half of the book is like, there's horror and there's intrigue, but it's very, the only thing I can think of is very Columbo-esque, of like, it's intrigue because you're finding out things, right, versus the horror aspect of it. And then it is in the last half of this that is suddenly becomes very gruesome, and you get some horrifyingly tragic information, right? And so it's very much written in a almost in a TV show kind of way, right? Or very movie-esque, right? Of probably more movie-esque, of where like you are getting a lot of information, and then at the very end you just get told everything, right? Which I guess, in terms of mystery stuff is pretty standard, but I think it feels very much like it feels like the detective TV shows that are plays on Sherlock, of like, there's this one weird connection that gets made that would be almost impossible to extrapolate on your own, right? And the same thing kind of gets done here, because they are so focused on these pictures, right? And it's becomes this, right, this final interpretation of this picture that gets drawn by a man who has been murdered on the mountainside, and the initial interpretation by the police is wrong. The second interpretation is done by, oh, can I remember his name? But by a former student of the man who has been murdered, ends up being closer to being correct, but not fully correct, and it gets him killed. And then finally, the third interpretation by Kumai is correct, right? In which the entire point of this picture is that initially they think that he's just drawn this because that's what this art teacher has always done on the mountain. His student comes in and does the same walk that his former teacher had done, and realizes that this picture would have been impossible to paint at the time that they had assumed he had died, and realizes it actually occurred later, the next morning, which to him is a indication that all the assumptions that have been made were wrong. It turns out that that's also not correct. The final interpretation is that the police were correct, but they had set it up, the murderer had set it up to make it look like he had been killed at a specific point, right? And then before he died, the teacher created false evidence effectively, to misput the time of death, right? And it's this all very like kind of strange, of just like when things are occurring, and you know how do alibis work and all of this stuff, right? And yeah. And so the ending feels a little convoluted, right? Of where, you know, you feel like you're getting somewhere, and it turns out that that's kind of correct, but not fully correct. And we make some jumps in logic that are not intuitive in a way. Yeah. I'm trying to think of what else. It's also very fascinating because it intertwines 3 different murders, really 4 murders. And actually, how many can I count? It is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 murders, actually. 5 murders that become intertwined in this really this massive conspiracy, but one that is so strange and convoluted it doesn't feel like one, right? Of where this person ends up being a serial killer almost out of accident in a way, right? And it's strange in that way, right? But it feels very much like, I mean, it reads very much like an episodic TV show, or, you know, even one of these one-off detective films, of where like the solution is found by solving and studying this death that seems to have nothing to do with this massive case, right? And you see that a lot with the detective shows, of where like the solution is found by studying the death of someone that seems to have been an accident, right? And this is very much the same way, right? Of where like the unraveling of everything occurs by pure accident, right? So yeah. So in that sense, right, this I don't feel is as strong as Strange Houses, because Strange Houses, I feel like, even though was convoluted in a way, was a little bit more straightforward. I don't want to even say straightforward, right? Because you don't want a mystery to be straightforward, but a little bit more attainable, I think, right? Versus Strange Pictures, which is, I think, right, you're making some huge jumps in logic that can be done, but I think are a little bit harder to get to. I think the joy of this also, kind of wraps it up really nicely. Versus Strange Houses, part of it being made into a series is then that it has to have more of an open ending. But I think that's a much stronger way to do something like this, of where, like, who's right, who's wrong. Have you solved everything, or have you only solved half of it? Whereas this, it ends up feeling very much like you have solved all of it. So yeah. What else to say about this piece? Because I really did enjoy it. The yeah. Yeah, I think that's it. Is that it? Is that it? But yeah, I think that's it for Strange Pictures by Uketsu. Yeah, very lovely book. I'm very excited to see Strange Buildings here in a couple months. Yeah.